It's 10 o'clock. This is Sky News at 10. Our top story. A showdown in Saudi. US and Ukrainian negotiating teams prepare for peace talks next week as Donald Trump says both Kyiv and Moscow are ready to deal.
Ukraine wants to make a deal because I don't think they have a choice. I also think that Russia wants to make a deal because in a different way that only I know. Only I know. They have no choice either.
The UK Defence Secretary meets his counterpart in Washington as the Russian ambassador to the UK gives Sky News this assessment of the UK's role.
Do you think the UK is helping or jeopardising the current path to peace?
At the moment, the UK is at the head of those who are resisting quick peace.
I am with you. The audio message from Pope Francis recorded in hospital, the first heard from him since his health crisis began. Carl Clifford is found guilty of the rape of his ex-girlfriend on the day he killed her sister and her mother. Plus, the Chancellor Rachel Reeves tells Sky News that a crackdown on welfare is coming because the current system is letting down taxpayers. And we'll take a first look at tomorrow's front pages in our press preview from 10:30 right through to midnight. Good evening. The United States and Ukraine are set to have peace talks in Saudi Arabia next week as both sides make tentative steps towards repairing a relationship shattered by that tumultuous meeting in the Oval Office between Donald Trump and Volodymyr Zelensky nearly a week ago. Mr. Zelensky confirmed the talks this evening and said that Ukraine will work constructively with the US president to reach what he called a fast and lasting peace. Mr. Trump, speaking this evening, said that both Kyiv and Moscow had no choice but to make a deal. The Ukrainian leader was in Brussels today for a meeting of European leaders where he was again given pledges of support from the leaders of a continent now preparing for a significant rearming process. Here's our international correspondent, Diana Magnay.
For all Donald Trump's push for peace, Russia is not holding back on its attacks on Ukrainian cities. Here in Kryvyi Rih, Volodymyr Zelensky's hometown, at least 4 killed in an overnight strike on a hotel. But there is some progress on the political front. Talks planned for next week, again in Saudi Arabia, this time between the US and Ukraine.
I think what's going to happen is Ukraine wants to make a deal because I don't think they have a choice. I also think that Russia wants to make a deal because in a different way that only I know. Only I know. They have no choice either.
Like his president, Valentin Koshelenko is from Kryvyi Rih. Now in the United States, he volunteers to support Ukraine from afar, but fears Trump's rush for peace.
He pressed Ukraine to end this war in a faster way, but this is for Ukraine, that means capitulation, basically.
All Ukrainians have a dream, real dream, to have a peace in Ukraine. But the second dream is to have guarantees that this kind of massacre mass wouldn't be happen again.
Their future in the United States is also not guaranteed, after reporting on Thursday that Donald Trump might revoke the temporary legal status of Ukrainian refugees. The White House says no decision has been made at this time on the status of Ukrainians in the United States, but that surely means that it's under review, adding uncertainty to the lives of tens of thousands who fled their homeland. But that's what this presidency so far has been all about, uncertainty in people's lives, in the markets, for the whole post-World War II world order. That's why Europe is making its own plans, agreeing at an emergency summit in Brussels to free up what could amount to as much as 650 billion euros to spend on its own defence. And in Washington, Britain's Defence Secretary met with his US counterpart, who expressed his gratitude that the UK and Europe were increasing funding.
I think it's been very encouraging to watch our friends in the UK and in France step up to say they are prepared to take the lead to ensure an enduring peace in Ukraine. What the president has also said time and time again is, let's not get ahead of ourselves. Let's get both sides to the table. Let's get a commitment to peace. And that is what President Trump is actively doing, both with the Russians and Vladimir Putin and also the Ukrainians and Zelensky.
A real commitment to peace is not for Ukraine to make, though, rather the country to its east, which invaded in the first place. Diana Magnay, Sky News, Washington.
Our correspondent David Blevins joins me now from the White House. And David, talks next week, and President Zelensky saying he'll work for a fast peace. How likely do you think that is, given everything that's happened in the last week?
Well, I think we have to conclude that it is very likely, given that Donald Trump himself is now suggesting he will probably travel to Saudi Arabia in the next month to 6 weeks. His peace envoy, Steve Witkoff, acknowledged Europe's concerns today, describing Keir Starmer and Emmanuel Macron as stakeholders. But he added that the United States has Russia in a good place, and clearly President Trump wants to capitalize upon that. In the space of just 6 days since Volodymyr Zelensky was asked to leave the White House, Donald Trump has suspended military aid to Ukraine, and he has paused the sharing of intelligence, something deemed way above politics until this point. And by doing those things, he's been prepared for the question to be raised about where America's alliances are at this point in history. But none of it seems to matter to Donald Trump. He wants this deal done because he sees himself as the peacemaker, regardless of the fact that many will be concerned that it will be peace that comes at too high a price.
David, thank you. David Blevins at the White House for us. Well, it is perhaps hard to imagine the mood in the Kremlin at the moment after seeing their adversary, Volodymyr Zelensky, humiliated in the Oval Office and the United States suspending military aid to Kyiv. But what does Russia really think about Donald Trump's moves for a peace deal and the drive in Europe to increase defence spending? Our lead world presenter, Yalda Hakim, sat down today with Russia's ambassador to the UK, Andrei Kelin.
We've had serious discussions with Russia and have received strong signals that they are ready for peace.
Night after night, we've heard from President Trump, President Zelensky, and a cast of European leaders. But amidst the growing split in transatlantic relations, there have been few opportunities to ask questions of those benefiting the most from this changing world, Russia. Now their ambassador to the UK has sat down for an extended interview with Sky News. It was all smiles for an oftentimes tense figure, talking up chances of a speedy conclusion to the war.
When President Trump says he wants to see a peace deal fast, is this something that Russia is willing to discuss, negotiate, do it quickly?
Yes, we will be prepared to negotiate and to talk it. We have our position. If we can strike not a deal, if we can strike a negotiated settlement, we need a very serious approach to that and a very serious agreement about all of that and about security in Europe in the first place.
Do you think this current shift is in your favour?
It is in the favor of common sense and realities are changing, of course. Is it favorable for us? I do not know.
Around 20 countries are now understood to back a UK-France plan for troops to act as peacekeepers in Ukraine. But the ambassador categorically dismissed that possibility and Europe's scrambling diplomacy.
All the conversation is going on inside the Europe. And the whole purpose of all this mess is just to present something to Trump. Although
what do you
not
think,
to us, but to Trump.
What do you think they're trying to present to Trump? What are they trying to get out of it?
I have seen already multiple ideas, multiple plans about ceasefire temporarily for 1 month in the air and in the sea. It's a crazy idea. We will never accept it, and they are perfectly aware of that.
Do you think the UK is helping or jeopardising the current path to peace?
At the moment, the UK is at the head of those who are resisting quick peace.
So what of those who worry this will only embolden Putin?
Here in the United Kingdom, they are very good in inventing threats, I will say. As I have said, we are threatening in cyberspace, in the air, on the sea, and all of that. Looks like the UK is living in a terrible situation here, which is encircled by Russia, and soon it will, of course, to raise a white flag and actually surrender. All of that is absolutely silly.
Russia's most senior diplomat in the UK is clearly relishing the divide between NATO allies. That his position is now in many ways closer to Trump's than Europe's will worry many this side of the Atlantic. Yalda Hakim, Sky News.
Pope Francis has sent an audio message tonight from hospital to thank those praying for his recovery. He's been in hospital fighting double pneumonia for almost 3 weeks. The Vatican said it will stop issuing daily updates on his condition because of, as they put it, the stability of the clinical picture. Well, tonight, the 88-year-old's message was played out to the faithful gathered in St. Peter's Square.
I thank you from the bottom of my heart for your prayers for my health from the square. I am with you from here. May God bless you and the Virgin protect you. Thank you.
Well, Sky's international correspondent Alex Rossi joins us live from the Vatican now. And Alex, that statement will no doubt bring joy to those gathered in St. Peter's Square, but the Pope's health clearly still of great concern to the Vatican.
That's right, it will bring joy and it will bring some comfort. But the Pope has now been in the Gemelli Hospital, which is about 20 minutes away from the Vatican for, this is the 21st night. His condition still remains extremely difficult, but people here and around the world, he is of course the leader of 1.3 billion Catholics around the world, will take some comfort from that message, the fact that he was strong enough to record it. But the quality of his voice, he sounded weak, he still remains terribly sick indeed. It's also interesting that the Vatican, they have in the past when Pope Francis has been hospitalised, they have released photographs of him, images of him in hospital, but they haven't done that this time around. So that is certainly one thing to look out for. But the fact that he has been able to, he has felt strong enough to record this message, some people will see that as a sign of hope. Now, in terms of his medical team, they've described his condition over the last few days as stabilising. They say that the blood work that's been done is also stable. He's not presenting with any fever. He has double pneumonia, remember. He is being administered antibiotics, so they seem to be working. And for that reason, they're not going to give another medical update until Saturday. But that said, it is a complex situation, his medical team say, the doctors who are treating him, and they remain extremely guarded about his prognosis.
Alex, for the moment, thank you. As you say, the next medical update from the Vatican on Saturday. A triple murderer has been convicted of raping his ex-girlfriend on the day he killed her sister and her mother. Carl Clifford plotted the murder of Louise Hunt, the daughter of racing commentator John Hunt, after she ended their relationship. He stabbed her mother, Carol, to death before killing Louise and her sister, Hannah, with a crossbow. The jury took less than an hour to find him guilty of rape this afternoon. Our crime correspondent Martin Brunt reports.
This was Kyle Clifford moments after killing his 3 victims. The main murder weapon, a crossbow, is hidden under a blanket. He seems remarkably calm and unhurried after what he's just done. Cunning and cold-blooded. The former soldier had been planning the slaughter for 2 weeks. Ever since his girlfriend, Louise Hunt, broke off their relationship, he raped her before he shot her with the crossbow. She died, so too did her sister Hannah and their mother Carol.
He's absolutely sort of cold-blooded and calculated in his actions. There were so many opportunities to step away from what he's doing, but he had a plan from the very outset. That included the pretense to get into the house.
Clifford had an interest in Andrew Tate, the controversial social media influencer. The prosecutor wanted to tell jurors during the trial that Tate's misogynistic views had fuelled the killings, but the judge banned any mention. Tate, he said, was almost a poster boy for misogynists. The connection lacked direct impact on the evidence and would be deeply prejudicial. Clifford bought rope as part of his murder plan. then petrol cans. There was duct tape to tie up Louise before he raped her. At the gym, he used his phone to buy a butcher's knife on Amazon. That's where he got the crossbow too. 4 days later, his own dashboard camera recorded him pulling up near the Hunt's family home. It was just after lunchtime, a Tuesday last summer. He tricked his way into the house by claiming he was returning a bag of Louise's clothes. At that moment, she was working in a hut in the back garden. Carol, the wife of TV racing commentator John Hunt, was the first to die. Clifford stabbed her. When Louise went into the house, Clifford tied her up, gagged and raped her, and held her captive for 2 hours. Then he shot her dead with the crossbow. Hannah arrived, saw what had happened, and texted her partner for help, but then Clifford shot her. She managed to call 999 before she died. After putting the murder weapons in his car, Clifford drove off, heading for North London where he lived. In a cemetery, police and ambulance crews found Clifford seriously injured. He'd shot himself with the crossbow. In hospital, doctors battled successfully to save his life. In a wheelchair, paralysed from the waist down, Clifford refused to answer police questions.
There is nothing about that which suggests that you've gone there for anything else than to kill almost an entire family. I'm right in what I'm saying, aren't I, Kyle? No comment.
Kyle Clifford is not the first murderer in his family. His older brother Bradley is serving life for running down and beating to death a moped rider who damaged his car. The Hunt family were hugely popular in the town. 2 days after the murders, many mourners attended a regular church service. They included Carol Hunt's best friend.
Just a lovely girl. I just can't believe it's happened. It's, like I say, it's a thing nightmares are made of. She was the nicest, kindest, sweetest person that you could ever meet. Beautiful, beautiful person.
7 months on, with the killer convicted, the victim's family and friends are still struggling to understand how a jilted boyfriend could take such a violent revenge. Martin Brunt, Sky News.
The Chancellor has confirmed that there will be reform of the welfare system as she seeks to cut billions from the welfare budget. She also insists she's going to continue to meet her own fiscal rules. Speaking to Sky's Beth Rigby on the Electoral Dysfunction podcast, Rachel Reeves said that there has to be reform because the system is letting down taxpayers, the economy and recipients. She also repeated the government's commitment to reach 2.5% of GDP in defence spending by 2027 due to the enormity of the situation facing European security.
You had to do the defence spend announcement. Can you just sort of lift the lid on that a little bit in terms of its manifesto pledge broken, you perhaps didn't really want to do it as Chancellor and then you had to find the money. It happened really quick, huh?
Was a manifesto pledge that we're fulfilling. We said in our manifesto we would get to 2.5% of GDP. Obviously, we've got the spending review coming up in June. But as you sort of started off this section of the podcast, the world has changed. We can all see it before our eyes. And the decision was made not just to get to 2.5%, but to get to 2.5% in 2027. I think that was the sort of most significant bit, really, of the announcement. Everyone knew we were going to get to 2.5% in this Parliament. That was a commitment from us in our manifesto that we would get there, but we're actually going to get there in 2 years because we recognise that the world has changed, the enormity of the situation.
I just want to come quickly to the spring statement. Can you just quickly explain what that actually is? It's 3 weeks out. Can you just tell everyone what it is and why you're in a bit of a pickle about it vis-a-vis your own borrowing rules?
I made a commitment, I made a commitment in our manifesto to have one major fiscal event a year. So unlike the previous government, we're not going to have another budget in the spring. We only just had one in October. And as I said at the time, that was a sort of a once in a generation, once in a parliament type budget. I think people also know that we need to get better value for money for what taxpayers put in, and also we've got to reform our welfare system, because at the moment it's letting down taxpayers because it's costing too much, it's letting down our economy because there's too many people trapped on out-of-work benefits, and it's letting down the people who are recipients of benefits because they are trapped on benefits rather than actively supported back into work. So we don't need an Office of Budget Responsibility forecast to tell us that we've got to reform our welfare system. We're going to do that because it's the right thing to do.
You've got this problem, you've got a squeeze on the public finances. You're going to find that through savings in government spending rather than tax rises.
Well,
is that where we're going?
In the budget, we obviously did increase taxes. We increased national insurance contributions on businesses. We got rid of the non-dom tax status. We've reformed agricultural and business property relief, VAT on private school fees. So we increased taxes at the budget to plug the gaps in the public finances and to make sure we had money for the National Health Service. But we've just gone through a massive cost of living crisis. For many people, they're still struggling with that cost of living crisis. So I don't think it is the right thing to do to increase income tax, national insurance or VAT on working people. And we made that commitment in our manifesto less than a year ago that we weren't going to increase those taxes on working people. We're not going to renege on that commitment.
Police in Cumbria have confirmed the child who died when a car was driven onto a sports pitch in Cumbria yesterday was 10-year-old Poppy Atkinson. Poppy died after a driver collided with two children at Kendal Rugby Club, killing her and injuring another 8-year-old yesterday afternoon. Her family have paid tribute to her, saying the world has lost a spirit like no other. A 40-year-old man from Lancaster was arrested on suspicion of causing death by dangerous driving and remains in custody. Cumbria police said it is not thought to have been a deliberate act. Rohingya Muslims who have fled the civil war in Myanmar are being forced to return and take up arms. They had sought safety in Bangladesh, in the world's largest refugee camp. Now, young Rohingya men say they're being forcibly recruited and smuggled back to fight Myanmar's military. It's the same force accused of committing a genocide against the Rohingya in 2017. Our Asia correspondent Cordelia Lynch has this report from Cox's Bazar.
This is Cox's Bazar in Bangladesh, a mass of humanity, the fragile home of a persecuted minority. Rohingya people, mainly Muslims from Rakhine State in Myanmar, fleeing an escalating civil war there. But they're not safe here either. Some are being forced back to the country they fled to fight for the army accused of a genocide against their people in 2017. Jarker says he was abducted by recruiters at gunpoint.
Many of our Rohingya boys who were taken by force from the camps were killed in battle. So many people lost their lives.
How did it feel being forced to fight for a regime accused of a genocide against your people?
It was heartbreaking. They targeted children from poor families. The children of wealthy families avoided it by paying money.
The military needs manpower. It's losing ground in Myanmar. In Rakhine, the Arakan Army, an ethnic armed group, is on the verge of taking full control. That power shift is having a big impact in the camps.
The situation here in Cox's is desperate. People are disillusioned by poverty, violence, and the plight of their own people. Some are being forced to fight, but others are going willingly, claiming they need to battle for their own survival. It's estimated there could be between 3,000 and 5,000 fighters who have joined armed groups from here. An already insecure place does feel a lot more precarious.
Both the military and the Arakan Army are accused of committing atrocities against Rohingya Muslims. These men insist they won't take up arms for either side, but they will for for their own cause.
We want to fight for our rights because we have been demanding justice for a long time. But the situation has become unbearable. That is why we are fighting. Those who fight for Rohingya rights should not be called terrorists. They are standing for justice.
These shores are shaped by despair. The military denies forcing Rohingya back to the battlefield, but the camps tell a different story, one of surging violence and vulnerability. Cordelia Lynch, Sky News, Cox's Bazar, Bangladesh.
The Justice Secretary, Shabana Mahmood, is calling for new sentencing guidelines in England and Wales to be scrapped over concerns they'll create a two-tier system. The Sentencing Council says judges should consider whether a criminal is a woman or from an ethnic, cultural or faith minority before handing down punishment. Matthew Thompson reports.
Britain's struggling prison system has long been a source of political controversy, but now it's prompted a rare outbreak of political consensus. New guidelines from Britain's Independent Sentencing Council would make an offender's race, sex or faith a bigger factor in a judge's decision to jail them. This, it seems, has united the government and opposition against what they call two-tier justice.
To me, this seems like blatant bias, particularly against Christians and against straight white men. And in a time when many people feel that there is creeping two-tier justice in this country, this seems only to confirm it.
These are pretty vicious, aren't they?
Justice Secretary Shabana Mahmood has now written to the Sentencing Council, saying, "I'm requesting that you reconsider the imposition of this guideline as soon as possible. I will also be considering whether policy decisions of such import should be made by the Sentencing Council and what role ministers and Parliament should play." In fact, there's some evidence to suggest that, if anything, a two-tier system already exists, just in the opposite direction. Sky News analysis of Ministry of Justice data for 2024 found that ethnic minority offenders were 2 times more likely than white counterparts to receive a custodial sentence for drug offences. And a larger study of drugs offences in 2021, which controlled for key variables like criminal history, found black offenders were 40% more likely than white to receive a custodial sentence, whilst Asian and other ethnic minorities were 50% more likely.
And an organisation like the Sentencing Council are trying to inquire behind those stats and to understand why we have these racial disparities, are trying to recommend that the courts keep those disparities in mind. I think that makes sense.
The Sentencing Council stresses that it's judges who have the final say in who ends up in prisons like this one, not pre-sentencing reports. But even leaving all those debates aside, what's extraordinary is that on April the 1st, guidelines that the Justice Secretary herself says are two-tier sentencing will come into force, and the government can't stop it. The Justice Secretary is threatening to change the law if the guidance isn't scrapped, but that could put her on a collision course with the judiciary and raise big questions about who really holds power over sentencing. Matthew Thompson, Sky News.
Now, Glastonbury has revealed the big names topping its bill this summer. American pop star Olivia Rodrigo, best known for hits like This, Good For You and Driver's License, has been named as a headliner, along with the 1975 and Neil Young. And fresh off the back of a successful awards season where she scooped 5 Brit Awards for her album Brat, Charli XCX will also be performing at the festival on the other stage. Ray, Fatboy Slim, Nile Rodgers and The Prodigy are just a few of the other acts performing across the weekend, while Rod Stewart will play the Sunday Tea Time Legends slot. Well, that was Sky News at 10. Coming up, we'll take a first look at tomorrow's newspapers in the press preview. Tonight, we're joined by Conservative Home's Deputy Editor, Henry Hill, and Associate Political Editor at The New Statesman, Rachel Cunliffe. Amongst the stories we'll be discussing, this on the front of The Guardian. Its headline, a watershed moment. EU leaders agree huge defence spending rise. Stay with us, we'll be right back.
We are under Israeli military restrictions in terms of some of the things that we can film, but it's important to be in there. What a slow drive for the president as he approaches his golf club. 4 more years! Free wherever you get your news. I'm Mark Stone and I'm Sky's correspondent based here in Washington, D.C.
Welcome back. You're watching Sky News. In just a moment, the press preview. A first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. But first, our top stories. After a day of frantic diplomacy, it's been announced that talks between the United States and Ukraine aimed at ending the war will take place in Saudi Arabia next week. The Pope has sent an audio greeting from hospital to thank people for their prayers as he continues his recovery from double pneumonia. And the crossbow killer Kyle Clifford has been found guilty of raping his ex-girlfriend on the day he killed her, her mother, and her sister. You are watching the press preview, a first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. It's time to see what's making the headlines with Conservative Home's Deputy Editor, Henry Hill, and Associate Political Editor at The New Statesman, Rachel Cunliffe. They'll be with us from now until just before midnight. So let's see what's on some of those front pages for you now. Well, The Guardian has the headline, "A watershed moment. EU leaders agree huge defence spending rise." Trump is encouraged by Zelensky peace talks, reports The Times. The Financial Times reports that Canada and Mexico win a tariff reprieve in Trump's latest climb-down on trade. Pension fund giants boycott UK arms firms is The Telegraph's headline. The Metro revealed the results of a survey that 1 in 4 know a female victim of violence. Warped by toxic Tate is The Sun's headline, as it pictures the man charged with murdering 3 people with a crossbow next to the online influencer. Evil fuelled by watching Tate videos, writes The Express. The Mail covers the same story on its front page. The Mirror leads with the 3 victims of the Nottingham killer saying they may have been let down in death too, with fears hospital staff may have illegally accessed their A&E records. The Chancellor telling the majority of young people who are unemployed that they will have to work is the lead for The Eye. And The Star reports on a footy crisis as 5-a-side pitches ripped up for la-di-da paddle courts. And we are joined tonight by Henry Hill and Rachel Cunliffe. Welcome to you both. Let's start with the Guardian front page and that meeting in Brussels. The reporting from that, a watershed moment. EU leaders agree huge defence spending rise. I mean, this was to be expected, wasn't it, Henry?
Yeah.
This was coming.
For decades, European security has rested on American defence spending, and European countries have effectively used that envelope to pare their own military spending down very, very low. It has subsidised things like larger welfare states and so on. All of a sudden, in the space of a few weeks, Donald Trump has completely pulled the rug out from under that entire settlement. You know, he's pulling support to Ukraine, and we've always known that he was angry about European countries free riding off NATO, but he really just seems to be prepared to sort of completely destabilise it. So what we've got is nearly all the EU member states, with the exception of Hungary, which is Viktor Orban is quite sort of not pro-Putin necessarily, but is very much like Putin's man inside the European Union. They've agreed an €800 billion, which is about £670 billion increase in defence spending across the European Union. Now, of course, the European Union isn't a country, so it's not entirely sure what that looks like in practice yet, because it will have to be spread across 27 different national militaries. It's not sure whether the EU will bring in new coordinating infrastructure or anything like that, but it is nonetheless a huge shift compared to if you think about where we were a year ago, or even 6 months ago, 3 months ago, on where Europe was on defence.
Denmark's Prime Minister, Mette Frederiksen, set the tone of the meeting, we read. Spend, spend, spend on defence and deterrence. That is the most important message, and at the same time, of course, continue to support Ukraine because we want peace in Europe. But yes, definitely the pounds, the euros, the dollars will be spent on defence.
Yeah, we often talk about the European Union being gridlocked or moving at a glacial pace, but there's nothing glacial about this. You could say that European leaders should have been considering this 2 years ago when it looked like Donald Trump was running again and that he could possibly have a second term as president. You know, nonetheless, the changes have happened in the last couple of weeks and they have mobilised and they have moved. And even though Hungary's Prime Minister did not sign the statement that, which is European leaders sort of committing to Ukraine and committed to this statement, there can be no negotiations on Ukraine without Ukraine, which is obviously something that is pretty key if Trump is sending his negotiators off to meet with the Russians in Saudi Arabia. So Viktor Orban didn't sign it, but the rest of them all did, including the Slovakian Prime Minister, who has also been sort of sceptical. So I think there is real understanding in Europe that this is the top priority and there isn't really an option other than this. The Guardian also points out the comments of Keith Kellogg, who is the US envoy to Ukraine, talking about the shocking move for the US to just turn off intelligence sharing with Ukraine. And he uses very flippant language here. He says the best way I can describe it is sort of like hitting a mule with a 2x4 across the nose. You get their attention, which is an incredibly callous way to talk about blackmailing another country into signing a minerals deal when we know there's a very high likelihood that that decision turning off intelligence like that with no warning will have led to the deaths of Ukrainians when Ukraine is still technically, supposedly, an ally of the US.
You describe it as blackmailing?
I think it's pretty hard to see it as... I mean, I think that's the implication there, which is that you didn't do what we wanted you to, and so we turned off intelligence sharing so that your soldiers would die. Oh, now you want to talk, do you? I mean, it's real sort of bullying mobster behaviour.
Much talk about America changing their allegiance and moving closer to Russia. The Telegraph... quoting Hegseth, garbage to call Trump pro-Russia, so denying that is the case. And we know that Donald Trump himself said he's not on either side. He's in the middle. He's not for Ukraine or for Russia. He's in the middle.
Yeah, which is, I mean, in itself a fairly remarkable position, given that one of those countries has invaded the other country. It's not like they just decided to have a war and met in the middle, right? Yeah, the official line from the US is that this is basically just... they're doing what is necessary to try and make peace happen, right? And given the understandable reluctance of the Ukrainian government to agree to a peace deal that leaves Russia with 1/5 of its territory, they are strong-arming Ukraine through things like withdrawing spending and intelligence sharing to try and force a deal to happen. They insist that this is not being pro-Russian. Fine, maybe, but the problem with this, on its own terms, is that they haven't got any concessions from the Russians yet. Right? Because, you know, think about...
Well, they haven't asked for any.
Well, exactly. I mean, maybe they're playing their cards very close to their chest, but fundamentally, Putin's troops are still there, right? There's no suggestion, because he wouldn't withdraw, right? Because the real problem with the peace deal, one of the many, it has to be said, is that a couple of years ago, in maybe 2024, Putin annexed all of the territories which Russia currently occupies, meaning he's formally declared that they're part of the Russian Federation, which makes it now politically nearly impossible for him to give those up, right? Russia's been printing maps with them on it and everything. So what's Trump going to ask Putin for in exchange for all of the things that he's doing to force Zelensky to the table, right? Zelensky negotiating could end up giving up 1/5 of his territory and the mineral deal and everything else. What is Trump, if they want to take this line that they're not pro-Russian, prove it. Get something out of Putin to justify this strategy.
That is the big question, isn't it, Rachel? That what has been asked of Russia, what has been asked of Vladimir Putin?
Well, if you look at it from Putin's position now, why would Russia concede anything at this point when Ukraine has been pressured into making all kinds of concessions on a ceasefire, on the exchange of prisoners, on ceding territory, and that's all without Russia having to argue anything.
And also the US not sharing
and the US not sharing intelligence. So if you were Putin, you'd sit back and you'd wait for more. There was no incentive whatsoever for Russia to make any concessions. And I think it's really interesting, this statement by Hegseth. He says, we'll get characterised one way or the other. Oh, your stance is pro-Russia or pro-that. It's all garbage. He can't even bring himself to say, or pro-Ukraine, because there is no conceivable way to read America's actions over the past couple of weeks as in any way pro-Ukraine. I think the real risk here is that it makes Trump look like he's been absolutely played by Putin, who is a master negotiator, or appears to be a master negotiator. Trump has torn up the global order. He has dramatically reduced American influence on the world stage now that you have European leaders going, well, we can't count on America anymore. And Trump, has nothing to show for it. So where is the art of the deal?
Let's talk about President Trump's favourite word. Tariffs, yes. But we are reporting on a reprieve tonight for Canada and Mexico.
Yeah, getting flashbacks to the backstop and the Northern Ireland special exemptions from a couple of years ago, and everyone was like, we're absolutely going to do this tomorrow, and then it would be another month. So effectively, Trump has threatened swinging, I think, 25% tariffs on trade with both of America's NAFTA, North American Free Trade Agreement neighbours, Canada and Mexico. And that, if it was done at very short notice, would just have not quite catastrophic, but dramatic and bad effect on the economies of all three countries, right? Because even if you think tariffs might be good in theory, you want time for your economy to adjust to them coming in. You don't just want to throw up overnight, increase the cost of raw materials by 25%. Now, what's happened is a couple of days ago, the Trump administration gave an exemption to car manufacturers who met NAFTA rules. And now it said it's going to give a 1-month extension to anything, at least from Mexico, presumably from Canada, but they haven't said from Canada, any export from Mexico to the United States that meets NAFTA rules, which is about somewhere between 90 and 95% of all Mexican exports to the United States. The question is, what's this for, right? Because Trump hasn't really yet indicated that the tariffs, because normally if you're threatening tariffs, it's a bludgeon and it's a negotiating tactic, because few people actually think they're good. So it's, if you don't do this, we'll do the tariffs. Haven't really seen the demands yet, so it's not quite clear what this reprieve is for, but it is at least a welcome sign because the threat of them coming in has already wiped out all of the S&P growth that we've had since the election.
But it is very short, as you say, it's only 4 weeks.
Yeah.
Rachel, can we just move to the Express and the front page? We heard the result of the case against Kyle Clifford in court today, and this is a quote from that trial: "Evil fuelled by watching Tate videos."
I am slightly uncomfortable with the way that this story is being framed here and the way that he is being referred to as a jilted former soldier, and this idea that somehow because he was an ex-boyfriend who felt humiliated, that somehow, obviously not justifies, none of the papers are saying justifies, and they're all focusing on the horror, but that kind of explains it. I would be happier with a radicalised misogynistic terrorist, because I think that's what this is. I think a man who hates women so much, whether he's been watching Andrew Tate videos or for other reasons, that he decides to rape and murder his ex-girlfriend and then also her sister and her mother because he blames them for her breaking up with him. That's not a jilted ex-boyfriend. That's somebody who is deliberately committing acts of violence against women for an ideological purpose. So I think it is quite right that we have a conversation about misogynistic influences and extremist content online. I think it is right that we are now recognising that Andrew Tate's videos are not harmless or are not just distasteful. They are actively, incredibly harmful. But I think we should be very clear about what this story is about.
The court did just state that the facts that he had watched them, they weren't, proving that was causation necessarily for the atrocious acts he carried out. Rachel and Henry, thank you very much for the moment. We're going to take a break. Coming up, Rachel Reeves warns the young and jobless their benefits will be cut. That's in the eye.
Once almost lost, these denizens of the deep are back.
The problem for these whales is global warming. Water temperatures are rising.
We're worried that the animals are actually starting to starve.
Deadly and outdated. What do you think should happen to the net?
I would like to see them go.
I'm Nicole Johnston, Sky's Asia correspondent, based here in Beijing.
A towering monument to the China dream and its demise.
From one end of this country to the other, China is littered with real estate that's falling apart.
China is facing a tsunami of the elderly.
We have to work as long as health allows, otherwise, no money.
China is under pressure to pay for the pensions of 500 million retirees. I've reported on a wide range of stories from around the world.
Mass protests forced the president to flee.
The sight of the president's private swimming pool only reinforces to Sri Lankans the great divide here between rich and poor.
Aid groups say Gaza is now the world's most dangerous place to be a child.
The Israeli army has raided towns and villages all over the West Bank. These tunnels run all over Gaza. The Gaza Strip is ridden with them.
A referendum designed to unite the country has only deepened its divide.
Sydney's floodplains underwater again.
This is the third or fourth time in the 18 months that their homes have gone under.
Sky News, the full story first.
It may seem like a gimmicky toy, but it is part of the global race between the United States and China for new technology. This elite engineering, designed to humour and to help us.
Gives you the very best of Sky News wherever you are. Breaking news, videos, analysis, up at 6%. Podcasts, watching us live.
Joins us live.
All in one place. and all at just the touch of a screen. The Sky News app. Get the full story first.
We've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls and big picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story. I'm ready. Are you? Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News.
We're rolling.
Welcome to the world.
Our new podcast, starting now. It's very exciting. Every week we'll be reporting from the world's trouble spots.
We get to hold those in positions of power accountable, and we get to ask the questions that the audience, the listeners, want to know about.
And that's why it is so important that people tune in, come along for the road, come along for the journey. It'll be fun.
Welcome back. You are watching the press preview. Still with me, Henry Hill and Rachel Cunliffe. Let's take a look at the Eye. Front page, Gen Z jobless face benefits cuts if they aren't looking for work. Rachel Reeves is warning. She tells the majority of UK young people who are unemployed that they will have to work. This is a return of, we were just saying in the break, isn't it, the NEETs.
Yes, not in education, employment
Or training.
And Rachel Reeves is trying to frame this, and Labour are trying to frame this in a kind of positive, almost moral way, in that, you know, these young people, they should be helped back to work, they should be encouraged back to work. And I think that that is something that we as a nation are going to have to grapple with. Maybe we're going to have to think about what life was like for young people during the COVID lockdown years, which we as a nation have completely stopped talking about, and maybe that might have had some kind of impact on their mental health or their attitude to society and civic unity. Maybe we might want to talk about that. But really, it's about finding the extra money, because we've got more defence spending, we've got the fiscal headroom has sort of completely disappeared, she's got her fiscal rule, she doesn't want to raise taxes, and so we end up with front pages like this, which is just going to just horrify the Labour backbenchers further, who are increasingly, I think, they're sticking with the government publicly, but there are sort of increasing sort of murmurs and grumbles of, OK, but when's it going to end? Because week after week after week, there are stories of the government announcing things that are just incredibly unpalatable to their own backbenchers and to the kind of core of their voter base, even though the majority of the public actually support cutting the benefits bill.
But the money has to come from somewhere, doesn't it, Henry?
Right. It's never going to end. I hate to break it to these backbench Labour MPs. It's never going to end. There's just more and more of this to come. I'm a Conservative. Fine. Generally, getting the welfare bill down is a good thing to do. There's forecasts that, this is from the front of the Times, that £1 in 4 of every pound raised in income tax by 2030 will go on sickness benefit. The forecasts for things like pensions, NHS, social care going through the roof. We have a very large number of people unemployed, right? I am always slightly wary of the framing, like not in the neat framing, right? Because it implies that education and training are fine and are not a problem, and that they're taken out of the unemployment statistics, when in fact, if that training is low quality, or, given the amount that young people have to pay for it now with tuition fees, that can be a net negative if they are spending 3 years of their life and tens of thousands of pounds on a degree that's not going to pay off. But the one thing I think it is worth mentioning is when the government's looking at this, when the government's getting really stern with young people, when the government is announcing that the MOJ will face even more cuts when there is a court's backlog years long, we still have the pension triple lock, right? It's still the law of the land that pensions have to grow faster than wages forever, and it's paid to pensioners regardless of their income, meaning that people who are well off receive the pensions triple lock. Whoever's getting unemployment benefit that's means tested, right? Maybe some of them are lazy skivers or whatever, but they're still not earning very much money. And I think that it is, especially again for Labour MPs, it's the fact that even when the government is having to announce cuts like this, things that are massive universal payments to people who are well off remain apparently sacred cows that aren't going to be cut.
Well, they saw the backlash they got from the women means testing the winter fuel allowance.
gone in for a penny, in for a pound.
I agree with you, but they didn't, and that's the situation they're in now.
Just very quickly, we've only got 30 seconds or so. Telegraph front page, the two-tier sentencing quango could be stripped of its powers.
Well, Shabana
Explain
Mahmood
the story.
has got herself into a slightly odd position because she is now saying that she disagrees with this policy from the Sentencing Council that people from ethnic minorities and other minority groups should get pre-sentencing reports, which makes it more likely that you'll get a reduced custodial sentence. Robert Jenrick, the Shadow Justice Secretary, came up very strongly against this. Shabana Mahmood agreed with him, but she can't actually change this. So she is now in a bit of a strange position of saying, as the Justice Secretary, I don't think this is right, but it might happen anyway. I think that she's somewhat walked into a Jenrick trap there.
Rachel and Henry, thank you very much. We are going to take a break. Coming up, we will take you through the weather now.
A bright start and always a warm welcome. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Well, next week looks colder, but before then it'll be mild, perhaps not as warm as today, when 19 Celsius, 66 Fahrenheit, was reached. Many places will start dry tomorrow, but central Britain and the south and east of Ireland will see patchy rain. It'll be mostly mild, a little chilly in the north, with a local frost possible. England and Wales will see increasing cloud through the morning, giving showery outbreaks of rain, but the southeast looks dry and sunny. Ireland, Northern Ireland and southern Scotland will see a little rain too.
A bright start and always a warm welcome. Qatar Airways sponsors the weather.
Coming up next on Sky News at 11, talks between the United States and Ukraine aimed at ending the war are set to take place in Saudi Arabia next week.